Hello and welcome to Mabina TV. This is home of Providence Conservatism, where we advocate for a fine balance between individual creative genius excellence as afforded by capitalism and society excellence as afforded by equality of opportunity. So in essence, we are calling for capitalism with a human first, that is capitalism with a human first. So for now, this is Africa Perspectives, and in Africa Perspectives, I'm asking why won't African dictators retire? That is, why won't African dictators retire from power? Basically, you have leaders such as Uganda's Yoweri Museveni, who has been a dictator in Uganda for at least 37 years. Basically, when he came to power in 1986, he said that the problem with African leaders was staying in power. But why hasn't he? Why hasn't Museveni quit power then? Why hasn't Yoweri Museveni then quit power? So then I believe that the problem with African leaders is overstaying in power. And remember, Yoweri Museveni told his main rival, Kizza Besigye, his main rival then, Kizza Besigye, that if you want this power, then you must go to the forest and fight like me. That is what Yoweri Museveni told Kizza Besigye. That is, if you want this power, you must go to the forest and fight like me. So you can see how this has changed. Basically, Yoweri Museveni becoming Yoweri Museveni and now being a 37-year running dictator. He sees no one else that is going to assume power in Uganda. And of course, I'm saying he is grooming his son, Muhoozi Kainerugaba, to take over as the president of Uganda. So you can imagine. And I think Muhoozi Kainerugaba, the son of Yoweri Museveni, says he believes in he was advising the Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta that he should have stayed in power for so long. So why won't African dictators? Look at Paul Biya, a 37-year running, who is the oldest African president, I think at about 90 years old. So he has been in power for about 40 years. He has been in power for all this while, but then he believes that he stays most of the time in France. So how does he run Cameroon? That is Paul Biya. How does Paul Biya run Cameroon? How does Paul Biya run Cameroon when he is in France most of the time? I think that's what we need to ask. Why? How does Paul Biya run Cameroon when most of the time he is in France? Look at Equatorial Guinea, Theodore Nguema. He has been in power for since 1987, 1979, when he assassinated his uncle to capture power. That is Theodore Nguema. So he assassinated his uncle, and basically came to power and is in power now for about 44 years now. He has been in power, and of course he shows no signs. His son is the vice president of the country. So his son is the vice president of the country. And you can imagine that basically this is something that I think a lot of African countries will be going through. Now, not only that, look at Eritrea, the long-running dictator Isaias Afwerki has been in power since 1993 when Eritrea broke off from Ethiopia. So why don't African leaders leave power peacefully? And I think it would have been better to say that the essence of a great dancer is in leaving the stage while applause from the crowd is loudest. That is, the essence of a great dancer is in leaving the stage while applause from the crowd is loudest. But I think African leaders wait until the crowd has stopped clapping altogether, or even left the auditorium altogether. That is when the audience has already stopped clapping. That is when they want to be forced dragged from power. So I think African leaders have to be known that basically. I think African leaders have to know that basically their time in power is up. And what they need to do then is to be able to maybe have democratic gains. And I think what we need to do then is knowing that the underlying theory of presidential term limits is in saying that it is better. The underlying theory of presidential term limits isn't saying that it is better to truncate the term of a Senate than elongate the rule over despot. So basically, it is better to truncate the rule over Senate, as Mandela did, than to elongate the reign of a despot, maybe like Theodore Ngwama. And I think you have corruption basically in a country such as Equatorial Guinea. You have a lot of corruption that is going on. Basically, you had, I think, in a documentary in BBC, you had the leader, Theodore Ngwama, I think in an expose, basically he stashes most of the money abroad, and I think the bank that Theodore Ngwama banks is basically the bank that Theodore Ngwama stole the loot from Equatorial Guinea is located just a street away from Congress, which is supposed to be a bastion of good governance and democracy. So you can see, I have often said that basically for every mega corruption scandal from Africa, that is for every mega corruption scandal from Africa, then there has to be a Western wheeler dealer involved. And I think if you account for corruption outflows from Africa, if you account for corruption outflows from Africa, then Africa would be a net donor to the world. Africa would be a net donor to the world rather than a net recipient in aid. So that's it. That is, Africa would be a net donor to the world rather than a net recipient in terms of aid. So I think African leaders have to know that basically what they need to do is to enhance democracy, obey presidential term limits. Look at the former president of Guinea. Basically, he had his own term. Look at the president of Ivory Coast, Alassane Ouattara. He added his own term and said basically that the constitution began counting in 2016, not 2011, when he captured power. And remember, he had removed the other leader, Laurent Gbagbo, from power, basically saying he had removed Laurent Gbagbo from power, saying that basically Gbagbo was overriding the constitution, was overriding the election. That's why I propose that basically African leaders have to know when it's the right time to retire. So I think we need to carry out free and fair elections, and in some ways, the underlying cause in a lot of these West African countries. Look at the cause in Mali. It was basically you had people cheering, basically saying that these leaders were not giving their people economic nor political dividends. You had citizens in Gabon cheering, basically, when the army led by Ngwama took over power from the long-running dictator Ali Bongo. Remember, the Bongo family had been running Gabon since 1966. So it was Omar Bongo first of all, and then his son Ali Bongo, who had run Gabon for all that time. And I think I think Ali Bongo sought refuge in France, and I think the hand of France, of course, is very predominant in its former colonies in West Africa. But I think what we need to do then is to have a democracy that works, and I think we need presidents that obey term limits. Otherwise, military coups will continue to be something that will forever haunt African countries. There has been a coup in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, and of course lately in Gabon. So I think if you are to stop this military coup, then I think what we need to do then is to stop is to enact democratic principles, so that when your time is up, then you leave. When you are at your best, so that you leave someone else to continue. There will be that country. Even if you are gone, that country will still go on. There is no one leader that has an absolute mandate to rule over people. These are not monarchies. We don't have monarchies in Africa. So why is it that someone rules a country for 40 years, 50, for 30, 40, 50 years, when there are other leaders that could run those countries? And I think this is at the heart of the problem in Africa. And I think African dictators, they take away political freedoms from their people, as well as economic freedoms. I think maybe if they could be benevolent dictators, maybe like Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, or the Asian dictators, maybe, or maybe we could negotiate. Then they take away our political freedoms, and then they give us economic dividends. But they don't give us economic dividends at all, and maybe that is why. And then people are denied both political freedoms and economic freedoms, and I think that is why a lot of African countries are in peril. Look at the Arab countries. They can't plan for their resources from oil. They can't plan for resources from oil. I think a country such as Qatar, Qatar has oil revenues of about 200. I think it has the highest per capita income in the world at about $200,000 because the oil revenues are distributed to the citizens. So even if they have lost their political freedoms to the Qatari monarchy, royal family, but then they have economic freedom, so they are not that bothered at all. And I think for Africa, then I really think for Africa, then we have dictators that are not benevolent at all. They should have given us economic freedoms. If they are going to negotiate and take away the political freedoms, then at least they should have given us maybe economic freedoms. I think by now Africa should be a $200 trillion economy. Look at DR Congo. On its own, it's worth about $30 trillion, but that's only if it converts titanium to aeroplane parts, if it converts uranium to nuclear power, if it converts River Congo to hydroelectric power to power the whole of Africa, if it converts gold and diamonds to jewelry, if it converts nickel to lead bars, if it converts copper to electronics. But it has gotten dictators. Look at a dictator such as Mobutu Sese Seko, who at that time was in the intelligence that killed the then president of first prime minister of DR Congo, Patrice Lumumba. So basically he was assassinated, and of course you had him rule DR Congo, rule then known as Zaire, rule it with an iron fist. So I think we need leaders that are able to put African economic interests at first, and it is not that hard to develop Africa. I think our mineral resources are about $200 trillion. It is not that hard to develop Africa. It is only that our leaders don't have that. They don't have that will to develop Africa, and maybe that is why they want incremental growth. I think for Africa to lift its a billion people out of poverty, it needs double-digit growth year on year for about double-digit growth year on year for about 30, 40 years to lift its billion people out of poverty. And I think maybe we should turn Africa into a corporation so that it is the business community, the technocrat community that is us. And I think if that happens, then Africa will be able to grow at rates of maybe 20-30% economic growth year on year. And I think if we turn Africa into a corporation, then that would mean having about 10 million high growth businesses, each employing maybe about 200 million people. 200 people, those will be 2 billion jobs that will be generated. So I think Africa has to know that it's very well has to know that the leaders of Africa have to know when it is their time to quit power and stop this hanging on to power, even though they are not delivering dividends to their people. So I think for now, this is what I would urge African leaders to retire from power when they are at their best, retire from power when they are at their best. If this happens, then Africa will emanate from the doldrums of poverty. I think poverty is endemic. 75% of the countries, of the poorest countries in the world, are in sub-Saharan Africa. You can imagine the 75% of the poorest countries in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa. So how does this change? How does this change that so that we don't have all these leaders of sub-Saharan Africa, all of them having that is, we don't have African, sub-Saharan African countries contributing enormously to the poorest countries in the world. And I think if that happens, then, and I think the reason why Africans abroad are not respected, why black people outside of Africa are not respected, or even in Africa, is because their mother continent, Africa, is poor. I think look at the present debate, DEI debate in America, basically, where someone says that basically even Dr. Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard, that basically she is not qualified because she is a black person. I think it does not work well. And I think if Africa was a rich and if Africa was a rich place, then they would get very much the a black diaspora outside of Africa. They won't get much inspiration, but right now you have even Caribbeans. They don't want to associate as black people. That is Caribbean, or maybe Caribbean people, or maybe Jamaican or Trinidad. They don't want to associate as black people because the land they left behind, Africa, is very much poor. And I think if Africa increase so that it can be very, very rich, then they won't be clamoring to, they won't be proud. Look at the way white Americans are proud of Europe. You don't see that from African Americans because they think the place where they came from, and maybe even they think maybe they were saved from the savage that is African. I think that's a very bad thing to happen. So that has been Africa Perspectives for now. This is Mabinda TV. This is home of Providence, Conservatism, where I advocate for a fine balance between individual creative genius excellence as afforded by capitalism and society excellence as afforded by equality of opportunity. So in essence, you are calling for capitalism with human first, capitalism with human first. These people steal from